Member for Ballina.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise today on behalf of the Greens to speak on the Rural Fires Amendment Bushfire Prevention Bill 2015. The Greens empathise with the spirit of this legislation and in the context of the horrendous bushfires in the Blue Mountains in 2013, and also in the Hunter and Port Stephens. And I went to primary school in the Blue Mountains in Hazelbrook, and twice bushfires came up to the back of our property and destroyed my father's orchard. And so it isn't something at all that I or the Greens take lightly. The Greens have opposed the 1050 laws from the start because of the unintended consequences of these rules. The clearing of thousands of trees, including endangered ecological communities and threatened species, has become the unintended consequence of this legislation. The reality is that the code has become little to do with bushfire protection, but an out for developers and property owners to improve their views and property values at the expense of ecology, amenity and communities. The Greens have always supported responsible bushfire management and appropriate planning and rules to ensure inappropriate development in bushfire-prone areas is not allowed. We've also supported evidence-based proposals to improve bushfire protection, and the reality is that far from making people safer, there is strong evidence that the 1050 code does not mitigate fire risk. Evidence obtained under GIPA includes a New South Wales Rural Fire Service assessment of the Victorian Code, which is very similar to the New South Wales Code. In that report, concerns were raised about the disposal of waste and documents evidence of wood chips being scattered close to homes and infrastructure, which increases bushfire hazards. The report also flags concerns about breaking the relationship between trained assessors and the wider public, and suggests that by encouraging illegal tree removal operators, it further increases risks to the public. Both the New South Wales Rural Fire Service and the Office of Environment and Heritage accept that the current code is being abused for purposes other than bushfire risk management. And Mr Speaker, as we heard earlier from the member for Tweed, on the North Coast the impact of 1050 has been particularly harsh. One example is at Fingal Head, which has been cited widely in the public debate and is a devastating example. I do commend the member for Tweed, he's not in the chamber, but I do commend him for the work that he is doing and that he has acknowledged the horror show that was Fingal Head and the abuse of 1050. But I am going to read a short excerpt of a piece written by a resident, Isabel McIntosh, for the Saturday newspaper earlier that year of what happened at 40 Queen Street, Fingal Head. It reads, at 7 a.m. on an almost spring Monday last year, residents in Fingal Head were woken by the sound of chainsaws. It didn't take long to find the origin of the noise. On Robert Nankerville's property, the same one where his own ecological assessment had identified 27 different rainforest species, 5 men were hard at work clearing protected littoral rainforest. A resident rang the police, council was called. The Federal Environment Minister's office was phoned. The 1050 code rescinds every New South Wales law and can only be overridden by the Federal Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. Police stopped the work, waiting to hear if the EPBC Act had been breached. In a previous clearing incident prior to the 1050 code, Fingal Head Coast Care had successfully stopped unapproved clearing on the same property, arguing that heavy penalties could be imposed for destroying local protected vegetation. This time it was different. Greg Hunt's office phoned back saying that the 340 square metre area wasn't large enough to be of concern and the clearing could continue. By 7 p.m. that day, another remnant of littoral rainforest was gone. Trees were left uprooted and dying on the block. Eventually the lot, the seed source for the last remains of littoral rainforest on the North Coast, was mulched. And we also heard from the member for Tweed, he received a momentum of that time and how horrendous it was. Kay Bolton from Fingal Head Coast Care says that more than 44 mature trees were lost that day. With them went the hollows that takes decades to form in a tree's trunks and branches and provide a critical habitat to many species listed in the Threatened Species Conservation Act. 2 days later, a big old barking owl was spotted sitting desolately on a clothesline. Says Bolton, its home now sawdust. And that's the end of her letter. The Minister may have indicated changes planned to the code to exclude littoral rainforest and other areas, but the damage is done. The government's support for 1050 as a concept has left the community with a broad message that it is a free-for-all for clearing in this state. To address this, the underpinning feature of 1050 must be removed. Self-assessment is not an appropriate way to ensure bushfire risks can be reduced whilst preserving important vegetation. What happens is that piece by piece, remnant and endangered vegetation is chopped away and the community is left to try and get a response from government after irreplaceable bush and ecological communities are already gone. I would like to take this opportunity, Mr Speaker, to commend Kayleen Jones. It's in the spirit of today's matters around the SES. She's the Richmond Tweed Regional SES Commander, and praise her for her tireless and courageous service to our community because she has received a promotion to the role of Assistant Commissioner, Director, Regions East, and I congratulate her today. I also congratulate members of the community who have campaigned for amendments to the 1050 rules, Stop the Chop and the Wilderness Society in particular on the North Coast, Thinglehead Trust, Northern Rivers and Tweed Valley Wildlife Carers and Friends of the Koala. The community campaign is working very hard to convince the government that these amendments are necessary, and I'm sure that campaign will continue, and the Greens will be seeking to amend this bill in the upper house. Thank you.
Mr Speaker.